Hello, my name's Jeremy Broun and I'm celebrating 2018 as my year of the tree. I hope throughout the course of the year to share with you my thoughts about trees that have been very much part of my life for over 50 years. I'd like to share with you my journey with trees, primarily as a woodworker and designer, and also recently as a custodian of a few mature trees in England. So I'm kicking off with a film that I first made in 1991 based on an ash tree given to me by the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew from the Great Storm of 1987. The film was sold to colleges, so in a way this is the rebirth of a film made originally with a VHS camera. So please don't be too harsh because it's not in high definition. As they say in restaurants everywhere, enjoy.
This is the 9 o'clock news on Saturday, October the 17th. 18 people died and hundreds were injured as yesterday's storms, the West in history, left a trail of destruction as they cut across the south.
The devastation is by far the worst that has occurred since the outbreak of Dutch elm disease, which
The national assessment was impossible yesterday as workmen struggled to clear blocked communications and to forestall further danger from damage.
An estimated 3 million electricity consumers were affected by yesterday's power cuts. And the
great storm of October 1987 ravaged the south and east of England. Whole forests and woods were knocked flat. An estimated 15 million trees were lost overnight. Many of these trees were over 100 foot high and over 200 years old. This means that some of them would have been planted at the time of the French Revolution, or when steam power was being used before the advent of electricity. The very same wind which carried the seed of life also took away the life of these trees. Across the country, men with saws and bulldozers cleared the fallen trees in order to get the country back onto its feet. Many trees were taken away to timber mills. There was a glut of timber suddenly available: oak, ash, beech, conifers. And many more trees were just left to perish where they had fallen. After the great storm, there was a great burning time. It was a haunting ritual that only emphasized the great tragedy of the storm. There were those who said that the trees should not have been burned, for they believed the wood could have been turned to good use. Others said that much of the devastation of the storm could have been avoided. The trees were top-heavy and should have been pruned. As it was, the trees that were most vulnerable were those with shallow roots. But it happened. The great oak, beech, and ash were turned to ash. The Royal Botanic Gardens at Kew suffered much damage from the great storm. Over 500 trees were lost and another 1,000 badly damaged. At its annex at Wakehurst Place in Sussex, the situation was far worse, with an estimated 15,000 to 20,000 trees lost. Mr. Ian Bayer, Deputy Curator of Kew Gardens, declared, "This is the worst day in the entire history of Kew." The public response to the tragedy at Kew was overwhelming. Kew Gardens then decided to make available some of the storm timbers and approached a handful of craftsmen. Jeremy Broun was one of those approached.
Dear Mr. Broun, the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew is planning to mount an exhibition in approximately 2 years' time, showing some of the uses to which the timber...
Thank you for your letter. I would be delighted to take part in this exciting venture. I shall look forward
Dear
to
Mr.
seeing
Broun,
details of the timbers
I enclose the list of timber available for use as discussed in my letter of 22nd March 1988. We have appointed an agent, Mr. Anthony...
The timbers, of course, were in Latin, and many were as exotic as their name suggested. It was a great opportunity for me to use new and unfamiliar timber, but I began to wonder about the working qualities or dimensional stability of these timbers. So I played safe and chose a timber I'd used a lot, Fraximus americana, or in my terms, American ash. I went to see the timber and chose a log. I was able to specify exactly how I wanted the log cut. I decided to have it converted into boards between 1 and 2 inches thick. I chalked the dimensions onto the end of the log, and it was then cut into the required planks for me. This is called slice cut, or through and through, rather like a sliced loaf. The converted log was then set in stickers and seasoned for me, and several months later I received delivery of it at my workshop in Bath. It was certainly a red-letter day to receive the delivery of the planks to my workshop, knowing that these planks had been part of a living tree at Kew Gardens not that long ago. I was also thrilled that Kew had approached contemporary makers, such as myself, to make modern artifacts so the spirit of each tree would be expressed in this era rather than some bygone period. I wanted to keep as much to the spirit of the tree and resist the temptation to impose preconceived ideas. So I designed my first piece very much as I went along, in a way seeing what the wood wanted to do. I had decided to make a long, low table of chunky section, and the dimensions were quite arbitrary as I worked around the splits and knots in the planks. Necessity is the mother of much invention, and so too is the miracle of modern power tool woodworking. Even the smallest tools can clock up a lot of creative mileage. But it made sense to use a jigsaw on these heavy planks, as I had no one to help me lift them up to feed them into a bandsaw. You need a lot of patience at woodwork in any case, but it just took a bit longer cutting through these chunky boards. Now, much woodworking or cabinet making is done in straight lines. Contemporary handmade furniture tends to be articulate and almost overcrafted. I know that because I've spent many years striving to make clever pieces with intricate joints and highly polished surfaces. It's not always easy to produce simple things. Paradoxically, they involve more complex processes. Perhaps also you have to work through a lot of preconceptions to arrive at a simple truth. Now, the tools are important to me, but I'm not obsessive about them. The hand tools I own are either left over from my college days at Shoreditch in the 60s, or have been picked up second-hand at the local market. As long as they're kept sharp and are comfortable to use, it really doesn't matter. My cabinet-making background told me to remove the bark from the board, but of course it would have detracted from the character and essence of the piece to remove it completely. I would have liked to have left all the bark on, but I knew it would crumble away in time, so I chiselled off that which came away easily along the edge of the outer board, and then chiselled through the inner bark until the texture was firm, but leaving just enough to give the hint at the very edge of the tree. When working ash, there's no defined sapwood, which generally is softer in other timbers, and often unusable. The final finish to the edge was achieved with that wonderful tool, the spoke shave. You know, there's something rather magical about working with a spoke shave. It's almost a musical instrument as you feel the vibration of the material through your fingers. In 1989, I wrote a book called The Incredible Router. The router is probably the most versatile tool in the modern workshop. Its only handicap is the noise it makes. I was able to use the router to cut some intricate hidden joints which held the table base blocks together. Such is the fineness of control of this power tool that I was able to cut the mortises freehand. The blocks were linked by tiny loose tenons which were glued in and concealed by subsequent blocks, hence attempting to create a mystery as to how the table is held together. The final finish takes almost as long as the making, but power sanding speeded it up. I deliberately contrasted the smooth surface of the top and underside of the table with the roughness of the edges left straight from the saw and chisel. Of course, hand and power tools work together. It would be quite philistine and certainly commercially disastrous to use just hand tools because of the time it takes, but that's not to say they do not have a place in a small workshop. I recall using hand tools during the 1974 three-day week during the power strikes, but then in those days they were virtually the only tools I possessed. Today we enjoy the miracle of power tool technology, and as William Morris said 100 years ago, we must be masters of machines, not their slaves. In my workshop they're all tools alike. The important thing is that they're used to serve the hand and mind in achieving objects which are both useful and aesthetically pleasing. A 4-year-old boy looked at my table at the exhibition and said, "Can't he draw straight lines?" Drawing straight lines is something I've always had difficulty in. I used to loathe doing working drawings as a student, but preferred to do freehand sketches. One of my earliest pieces, and in fact the second design I chose to make for the Kew exhibition, is a rocking chair I first conceived in 1973. It was quickly drawn on the back of an envelope, and it's probably my most successful design. The simplicity of the chair is dictated by the severe restraints I had at the time in terms of tools and materials. The original chair was made out of 6 by 1 1/4 pine, and I used a radial arm saw in its construction. Nowadays, when this chair is made up occasionally to special order, I use a variety of power tools and make the chair out of ash. So, when I chose American ash for the Kew exhibition, I had in the back of my mind to make the high-back rocking chair. I've never owned one of my own chairs, so this was a golden opportunity to use this special timber. Some might say it's a dated design. Why not make something new? In my travels to Finland several years ago, I took notice of the laminated furniture of Alvar Aalto. Some of his pieces, designed in the 30s and 40s, are still sold all over the world and are still regarded as essentially modern. Such is the pace of our own society that designer goods go out of date in no time at all, yet paradoxically we cling to the past when it comes to craft. In my work, I strive to combine the elements of design and craft using innovation and tradition. Much serious design is about solving problems, and in the rocking chair there was the problem of upholstery. I was no expert upholsterer, so I avoided the problem by looking at other ways of supporting the body and came up with the idea of weaving the chair like a tennis racket, using rope. The simple method of drilling holes and passing rope through them gave the chair its skeletal look, which I thought made it far more attractive. A special feature I introduced into the Kew rocking chair, which I hadn't crafted into other chairs, was a Danish shoulder, a very fine gap along the shoulder line which emphasizes the two pieces. Actually, this principle is not new. In Michelangelo's famous Renaissance painting of God creating Adam, the fingers of God and Adam all but touch, except for a minute gap, creating enormous energy from the tension between the two figures. Energy and tension is what goes into the weaving of the rocking chair, a laborious task. I was spared this as a student came to work with me for a fortnight, for work experience. So she strung the chair for me. To think that over the years about 8 miles of cord have passed through these rocking chairs. There's much repetition in furniture making, just like any other job. It's just that it's punctuated by some exciting moments, and none more than the moment of truth when the piece is completed. When I used to sell this chair design from a gallery in Bath, the gallery owner, a Greek, had to persuade people to sit in it. I guess because of its sculptural look, it was preconceived by many people as being uncomfortable, but they were pleasantly surprised. Of course, nature is the great designer, and certainly the great inspirer. I spent many hours in my youth by the river fishing. It wasn't just to catch the fish, as often I came back empty-handed, but one did a lot of thinking by the river, indeed dreaming. And even today, when I have the rare opportunity to find a river like this, my thoughts are stimulated by its powerful movement and indeed the wonder of the natural environment. This was my final piece, made from the Kew timbers.
The exhibition at Kew Gardens Gallery marked the 3rd anniversary of the storm. It ran from November 1990 to January 1991 and featured wood engravings by George Tute, who received a quantity of boxwood. Other craftsmen included Fred Bayer, Richard Bateman, Toby Winteringham, Rupert Williamson and Robert Games. This 10-foot long mural, called After the Storm by Robert Games, took nearly 2,000 hours, involving 40 different grains ranging from brown oak and walnut to maple, yew and pine. Rupert Williamson, however, selected oak, cherry and ash, and some rather unusual and exotic Osage orange for his pieces. He summed it up by saying, "It's really rather romantic. I know a lot of people like the idea that the wood has been grown somewhere they know."